Hi, it's Dwyer. It is March 11th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let's give some really early thoughts, and it's very early. It's a macro view on Dmitry Bivol against Benavidez. Let me point out that at the time I'm making this video, I have not been able to see the line, right? Just understand, we're flying blind here. We're just thinking about what we think will happen, and we're going with it, right? Let me point out, and observers need to know this, these two guys used to spar. Right? Apparently, the sparring has led Benavidez to believe that he can beat Bivol. Understand, Bivol is a little bit more tight-lipped. He acknowledges that they've sparred. He won't talk about what happened during sparring. In the comment section of this YouTube video, I have a link to a great article on Seconds Out, one of the premier boxing sites online, right? And in that article, the director of Training Day, in fact, the director of Patriots Day, Peter Berg, was actually present during the sparring session. And he actually reports that one of the guys got dropped off a jab. The person who hit the canvas was Dmitry Bivol. Right now, folks need to understand a few things. Fighters approach sparring differently. Some fighters show up and they have the attitude of, okay, let me see if I can beat this guy. Right? Timothy Bradley, by his own admission, showed up to sparring with a guy he didn't know that well, Terrence Crawford. And after the first day of sparring, Bradley made sure that he was ready for the second day. Bradley at the time was a champion. And he came out the second day fully prepared for Terrence Crawford, only to learn that Crawford, who did not have the title at that time, might have been the better fighter. Right? You have guys like that. Sparring is, a test of manhood. Right? Here I am sparring X. Let me show X. Let me show myself that I can beat X. But then you have a different group in sparring. And you need to speculate on who's who here. You have the group in sparring that'll show up and they'll say, you know what? My left hook is not up to par. I'm not even going to throw right hands. I'm going to try to focus on throwing left hooks. So, of course, you're in against the guy, and if the guy's Deontay Wilder, I'm just picking a name with a great right hand. If the guy's Deontay Wilder, you might be hanging out by his right. You might have success. You might think to yourself, man, I was able to land some shots. Right? You might not be able to if it's a real fight, if Wilder actually gets an opportunity to throw his right hand. Right? These sparring stories, you have to understand that, just like baseball players in spring training, just like NFL football teams in preseason, right? Some of these teams show up, some of these athletes show up, and they're not themselves in preseason because they're working on different things, right? They're trying to improve other parts of their game. Some fighters feel that sparring doesn't count, right? As Allen Iverson famously said for basketball, he says, man, it's practice, right? Some guys view it as practice. Other guys view it as a time to make a statement. Now, here's what we know about this fight. Benavidez' power, at least to date, has not carried to 175 pounds. I'll concede he's fought two elite guys. I personally feel that Grovestick is underrated. Grovestick was giving, in fact, he was beating Beterbiev, and then fell apart. Beterbiev started to assert himself in around round 6 of that fight. Right, Grovestick is the guy who ended Adonis Stevenson's career. Right, Stevenson was one of the better champions at 175 pounds. Grovestick, of course, used to spar with Benavidez. I need for people to understand the level of work Benavidez has put in over the years. Benavidez, of course, has sparred with people like Golovkin. He used to be one of Golovkin's main sparring partners. Right, so Benavidez, not surprisingly, has been in with some greats. Right, off the top of our heads, we could name 2 future Hall of Famers, Golovkin and Bivol. Right, Benavidez does most of his work in the gym. Right, very well prepared fighter. Of course, the other fight that went the distance was the David Morrell fight. Again, Morrell is one of the best at 175. Right? He was unbeaten when he faced David Benavidez. The fight was spirited. I personally am surprised that Morrell went the distance. Morrell did take a lot of big shots. Now, let me just point out that unlike Morrell, Dmitry Bivol is defensively blessed. Right? Very hard to find him. You were watching the Beterbiev fight. You saw Beterbiev on his front foot. You saw Bivol backing up. Right? He was the Ginger Rogers to Beterbiev's Fred Astaire. And of course, even when Bivol was backing up, he somehow found a way not to back into a corner. He found a way to keep his rhythm. He always had his hands up. He was defending himself. He knows how to roll away from punches. He knows how to catch punches on a forearm. Now, let me just say, Bivol might be the kind of fighter who does not show his complete game in sparring. Right? Understand, Gilberto Ramirez, and Bivol has been on a run. Make no mistake about it. Gilberto Ramirez right now is a unified cruiserweight champion. I think he's more than that. I think right now, Gilberto Ramirez, in my eyes, is a future Hall of Famer. Understand, he held the belt at 168 before he got to 200. Right? But understand, he and Bivol used to spar a lot, according to reports. Right? A lot. Well, they met, one of the important fights of the last few years. Both guys were unbeaten. Interestingly, Ramirez knew to go to Bivol's body. Right? Did a better job of it than Beterbiev in my eyes. But Bivol won the fight. Bivol had a mobile jab. Bivol is a combination puncher. Bivol was able to show some hand speed. It looked to me like Ramirez was surprised at times, which was surprising given that they had sparred in the past. Bivol strikes me as a guy who has a reserve, right? This is the reserve Martin Bacoli claims he has when he's sparring a guy. In other words, hey, I'll show you a lot of things, but I'm not going to show you everything I have. Right? So it could be that Bivol wants to fight with Benavidez. Understand, Turkey and Beterbiev apparently won a third fight with Bivol. Right? Bivol can get paid without fighting Benavidez. Right? He would lose one of his belts, but what else is new in boxing? Right? Just understand, with options, Bivol, according to reports, wants to fight Benavidez, who, according to other reports, knocked him down in sparring. It's seconds out. That seconds out article, again, is in the description of this YouTube video. Let me also point out, too, and I know this comes as a surprise to some people, but Benavidez has extremely fast hands. There's a zone that Benavidez can get into where you actually notice that he is an extremely fast-handed combination puncher himself. Right? But understand, he won't show that part of himself early in fights. Right? He wants you to be lulled into his normal rhythm. Then he takes it up a notch. Right? In other words, Benavidez drives in third gear. Right? It's only when the heat gets turned up that you'll see Benavidez's fourth gear. Let me also make another point here. Both guys, and this is a hallmark of both guys have great stamina. So you'll notice there are fights where a Bivol pulls away. That's what it was. Pulls away from a Canelo. Right? In the Caleb Plant fight, Plant got off to a decent start against David Benavidez, and Plant's a mover. You thought, uh-oh, are Plant's legs going to determine this fight? Then you'll notice Benavidez starts to get into rhythm in about the fourth round. And Benavidez then chases him almost relentlessly the rest of the fight. There's never a moment in that fight where you thought, oh, Benavidez is out of gas. Right? No, Benavidez has the patience to chase a mover for several rounds. Right? Now, let's speculate here on what both fighters think is their path to victory. From the Benavidez side of the ledger, I think Benavidez thinks, and I know he supposedly knocked down Bivol off a jab, but I think Benavidez thinks that he can land hooks to the body. Let me say this too. You see certain fighters and you can just sense that the guy has thought about a lot before the fight, strategy-wise. Benavidez always, to me, seems to know what he's doing. Right? This is the guy who can fight different styles. This is the guy who, again, the David Lemieux fight. Let me mention it yet again. He's fighting David Lemieux. He has Lemieux's left hook blocked early. Doesn't have to get hit with it. Then say, oh, this guy hits hard. Let me block the shot. No. From the opening bell, he comes out and he has that punch blocked. Right? I call Benavidez a savant. I think this is a guy who was taking notes mentally when he sparred with Bivol. I've looked at Bivol, and that Bivol has fought some excellent body punchers, among them Canelo, who's shorter, who is sudden. You would think if any fighter had a chance to dig in on Bivol's body, it would be Saul Alvarez. Right? I get the feeling Benavidez thinks he can dig in on Bivol's body. I think he views that as the path to success. Don't get me wrong, Benavidez obviously can throw other punches, right? But I think Benavidez plans to try to walk down Bivol, go to the body, right? Fight we'll call it Lupe Pintor type of fight, naming a Hall of Famer everyone should know about. Well, let me say for Bivol, it's different. Benavidez has been faulted by more than one opponent on his footwork. Right? The feeling is that, like Julio Cesar Chavez, Benavidez sometimes has his feet adjacent to each other. Right? You could tell that fighters like Caleb Plant, again, gifted mover, great leg work, thought he could outmove Benavidez. Right? I think Bivol believes that the way to beat Benavidez is with movement, with a jab, and with periodic combinations. I would expect Bivol to fight exactly the same fight that he fought against Gilberto Ramirez. Right? Force the opponent to lift their feet, force the opponent to try to come find them, When the opponent is moving their legs, when that anchor leg is off the canvas and there's no leverage, Bivol is a master at jumping in the pocket, getting off 3-4 shots, then backing away. Right? Give the crowd a couple of exchanges every round that has them thinking that you're in control. Right? Fight the fight primarily on your back foot. Don't allow the other guy to set up a pocket. Force the other guy to turn. And as the other guy is turning, hit him with some shots, back away. Strategically pick a couple of rounds to take off. Against Beterbiev, it's the 4th, 5th, and 6th rounds, both fights. Right? Take off a couple of rounds. Come back strong. Finish strong. Assume that at the end of the fight, people are going to appreciate your movement, your timing, your jab, your combinations. The bet I like in this is that the fight goes at least 7 full rounds. Folks, you have many online casinos that have a lot of offerings on over-unders, right? These two guys know each other. Benavidez has a problem catching up with movers the first 25% of the fight. Right? Bivol is content to move. He's not going to come in trying to knock out David Benavidez. Right? Let's remember, he doesn't knock out Joe Smith. He doesn't knock out Arthur Beterbiev in either fight. Bivol himself has been winning fights by decision. Right? Bivol just handled the power of Arthur Beterbiev. Right? If you look at Bivol closely, you'll see a guy who handles power punchers. I don't think Benavidez's power, especially since he's seen it already in sparring, is going to completely shock Bivol. Right? I think Benavidez, too, is a prime candidate when the fighters are fully rested to get to lift up his feet. I thought Andre looked good against Benavidez for the first 3 rounds. Right? If you're a mover and you can get Benavidez to follow you a little bit, you're going to have a bit of a cushion early. What we've also learned is that Bivol has the legs to allow himself to have a cushion in later rounds as well, provided that he paces himself. So I'm expecting this fight to make it to the 8th round. So I'd be inclined to take the over 7. Now I'm expecting the over-under to be higher than that. And I'm expecting the odds that I'll receive to be less than even money. Right? Probably a minus 150, maybe a minus 200. That's the risk I'm willing to take, understanding that if either guy gets a stoppage before the start of the 8th round, I'll lose it all. Right? That's the risk I'm willing to take. Bivol, again, better defensively than Grovestick, better defensively than Morrell. Right? Thinks through the entire sequence. Right? Bivol also, while I think a guy who looks at his films might be able to throw an uppercut on him. Right? I'd love to see him against prime Carl Froch, for example. And I'm sure Benavidez knows how to throw an uppercut. I have no doubt about that looking at past fights. Right? The problem is Bivol has to slow down enough for you to be able to get the timing on an uppercut against him. That's going to take several rounds. Right? Rather than pick a side here, I'm just picking a distance. I think this fight goes several rounds. I think it makes it well into the second half of the fight. Right? Again, Benavidez has not stopped anyone at 175. I'll agree, there were times when it looked like he was on the verge of doing so in the Morrell fight, but he did not. And again, Bivol is the kind of guy who faces big punchers, right? Canelo, Beterbiev, Joe Smith, right? He went the distance against all of them. So I'm picking distance in this fight. I think the fight makes it to the 8th round. I'll pay a little bit in terms of the odds, right? If they set a minus 200, I'll say, okay, fine. You know, if I know that once the bell rings for the 8th round and the guys stand off their stools and walk to the middle of the ring, I'm paid, then I'm good, right? While recognizing that, of course, Benavidez, when he was at 168, was a closer. That's the risk I'm willing to take. That's how I see the fight. Those are my early thoughts. This can change if we hear stories out of camp about problems making weight, maybe the fighters being slapped around. Maybe there are more stories other than the seconds out story that I have in my favorites folder here. Excuse me, in my in the YouTube description to this video about other knockdowns possibly in sparring between Benavidez and Bivol. Should be a tremendous fight. Folks, let me also say this too. 175's loaded, right? You still have Beterbiev out there. You still have Morrell out there. That's a fascinating fight, right? You have Lyndon Arthur again fighting Anthony Yard. Callum Smith looked great against Buatsi, right? Buatsi's still out there. He's a tough customer. Maybe he just caught Callum Smith on the wrong night. This is a loaded division that certainly is worth your attention. Understand, too, there is no way, in my mind, that Diego Pacheco is going to be able to stay at 168, right? Pay close attention to 175. Whoever wins this fight, and I'm surprised Bivol's still fighting. Bivol's a little bit older than Benavidez. I'm surprised Bivol's still fighting given his victory in the rematch over Beterbiev. In fact, I'm even surprised he took the rematch, given how good he looked in the first Beterbiev fight. Right? But whoever wins this fight, if they want, they have a lot of loaded matches on both sides of the Atlantic. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.